At dinner, my fiancée joked, "Why did I even say yes to him?" while staring at my best friend. The question hung in the air like a confession disguised as humor, and in that moment, I saw 4 years of my life differently. Looking back now, I realize the signs were always there, hidden beneath Jennifer's pharmaceutical sales charm and my own willingness to believe in what we'd built together. I'm Nathan, and I teach archaeology at Riverside Community College here in Ohio. Not the most glamorous profession, but I love uncovering stories buried in time, which makes it ironic that I couldn't see the truth buried right in front of me. Jennifer and I had been together for 4 years, and I'd thought we were solid, the kind of couple that made sense on paper and in practice. She was vivacious where I was reserved, ambitious where I was content, always pushing forward while I preferred to dig deeper into what already existed. The proposal happened 8 months ago during a sunset boat ride on Lake Erie, just the two of us and the water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I'd used my late mother's vintage sapphire ring, the one she'd worn for 37 years of marriage, and when Jennifer saw it, she cried what I believed were genuine tears of joy. "Of course, yes, Nathan, absolutely yes," she'd said, her voice breaking with emotion as she held out her trembling hand for me to slide the ring onto her finger. We'd started planning an autumn wedding at the historic Willowbrook estate, a venue she'd dreamed about since attending her cousin's wedding there 3 years prior. The custom gown from that Cleveland designer was already ordered, ivory with hand-sewn pearls that cost more than I made in 2 months, but seeing her face light up during the fitting made every penny worth it. All 150 guests were confirmed, the caterer selected, photographer booked, and I'd even arranged for my colleague's jazz quartet to play during cocktail hour because Jennifer mentioned once how sophisticated live music made everything feel. My childhood friend Blake had relocated to our town about 8 months before my proposal, right when spring was turning everything green and full of possibility. We'd been close since college at Ohio State, where he studied landscape architecture while I buried myself in ancient civilizations, and having him nearby again felt like recovering a piece of myself I hadn't realized was missing. Blake had launched this boutique landscaping and outdoor design firm that seemed to capture exactly what wealthy clients wanted. Not just gardens, but entire outdoor experiences that transformed properties into personal paradises. Within months, he'd secured contracts that made established firms jealous, designing estate gardens for the country club set, winning bids for municipal park renovations, and even landing this botanical garden redesign project that would put his name on something permanent and beautiful. I was genuinely happy for Blake's success, proud even, because he'd always been the guy who could see potential where others saw problems, turning neglected spaces into something extraordinary. Jennifer seemed impressed too, maybe overly impressed, but I chalked it up to her natural appreciation for success and ambition, qualities she'd always said attracted her to driven people. The three of us would have dinner together regularly, Blake always insisting on picking up the check despite my protests, and Jennifer would pepper him with questions about his business model, his vision, his plans for expansion into neighboring counties. I thought it was just Jennifer being Jennifer, the pharmaceutical sales rep who networked instinctively, who collected successful people like some collected wine or art, seeing every connection as potentially useful somewhere down the line. Blake would humor her questions while shooting me these amused looks that said, "Your fiancée never stops working, does she?" And I'd shrug because that drive was part of what I'd fallen for initially. But sitting here now in my rented duplex, looking at that empty ring box I kept for some stupid reason, I realized those dinners were the beginning of something I was too blind or too trusting to see coming. Jennifer's behavior shifted dramatically as Blake's business flourished, like watching someone slowly reveal they'd been wearing a mask the entire time you'd known them. His latest contracts kept making headlines in the local business journal. The Riverside Heights estate gardens that transformed 12 acres into something resembling Versailles, the municipal park renovations that brought federal recognition and a sustainability award, and then that botanical garden redesign that would literally put his name on bronze plaques throughout the city. I was genuinely excited for my friend's success, but Jennifer's reaction went beyond normal appreciation into something that felt obsessive and uncomfortable to witness. She began making these cutting remarks about my stagnant academic career, always framed as concern but delivered with this sharp edge that left no doubt about her real meaning. "Nathan, Don't you want more than just teaching the same intro courses every semester? She'd ask, usually right after Blake had shared news of another major contract or prestigious client. I mean, Blake is creating legacies people can actually see and touch, while you're talking about civilizations that have been dead for thousands of years. Doesn't that feel limiting? The comparison hurt more because she knew how much I loved my work, how I'd light up explaining the latest archaeological discovery or helping a student connect with history for the first time. During our dinners together, she'd have her phone out constantly, scrolling through Blake's business Instagram with this hungry expression, double-tapping every post and commenting things like, visionary, or, this is what ambition looks like. While my recent publication in the Journal of Archaeological Sciences sat unread on our coffee table. I'd worked on that paper for 18 months, collaborating with researchers from 3 universities, and when it was finally published, Jennifer's response was a distracted, "That's nice, honey," before asking if Blake would be at the faculty mixer next week. She started dressing differently on nights we knew we'd see Blake, tighter dresses that she'd claim were just more comfortable, heavier makeup that she'd insist was because she'd had time to make an effort, and this strategic positioning where she'd always somehow end up sitting across from him or standing in his direct line of sight. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Jennifer was just impressed by entrepreneurial success the way she'd always been, but my gut knew something was shifting in ways that had nothing to do with professional admiration. The real alarm bell came when Blake pulled me aside after a brewery trivia night, looking genuinely uncomfortable as he showed me his phone. "Nathan, I need to show you something because this is getting weird," he said, scrolling through message after message from Jennifer that had nothing to do with landscaping and everything to do with personal territory she had no business exploring. She'd been messaging him constantly, starting with innocent questions about plant recommendations for our duplex tiny yard, then gradually shifting to asking about his dating life, his workout routine, what qualities he looked for in a partner, and whether he ever thought about what could have been between people who missed their timing. "Sometimes I wonder if I met the right person at the wrong time," one message read, followed by a winking emoji that made my stomach turn. Blake had been responding with polite deflection, keeping things professional and brief, but Jennifer's messages kept coming, sometimes late at night when I was asleep next to her, oblivious to the fact that my fiancé was digitally pursuing my best friend. "I haven't responded to most of these," Blake assured me, "and I think you need to know what's happening here because this isn't just friendly conversation anymore." I stared at those messages, feeling something fundamental crack inside me, but when I tried to bring it up with Jennifer later, she gaslit me completely, saying Blake was misinterpreting friendly interest in his business and that I was being insecure about her having successful male friends. To celebrate our engagement anniversary, I organized an intimate dinner party at our home for 18 close friends, wanting to create one of those perfect memories before the wedding chaos truly began. I spent the entire afternoon preparing my grandfather's famous lasagna recipe, the one he'd brought over from Italy and taught me during summers at his place, layering the pasta and bechamel sauce with the kind of care that comes from wanting everything to be perfect for someone you love. The backyard looked magical with string lights and lanterns I'd spent 3 hours hanging, creating this warm glow that made our modest rental feel like somewhere special, somewhere worth celebrating. Jennifer claimed she was too stressed from work to help much, though I'd seen her spend 2 hours getting ready, trying on 4 different dresses before settling on this burgundy number that was tighter and more revealing than anything she'd usually wear for our friends. Our guests started arriving around 7, Blake of course, several colleagues from the college including Dr. Harrison and Professor Martinez from the history department, Jennifer's pharmaceutical team members who I'd gotten to know over the years, and the Johnsons from next door who'd become like surrogate parents since we'd moved in. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to celebrate with us, raising glasses to our future, sharing funny stories about relationships and marriage, creating exactly the warm atmosphere I'd hoped for. But after Jennifer's 4th glass of Pinot Grigio, something shifted in her like a switch being flipped, and suddenly she became this person I didn't recognize, someone desperate and embarrassing and cruel all at once. She followed Blake around the party like a shadow, abandoning conversations mid-sentence to insert herself wherever he was, laughing too loudly at everything he said, touching his arm constantly, leaning in close enough that people started exchanging uncomfortable glances. When Blake politely excused himself to help me bring out dessert in the kitchen, she actually followed us, completely ignoring the conversation she'd just left with my colleague's wife about wedding planning. God, Blake, with shoulders like those from hauling all those landscape materials, I bet you could just pick me up and carry me anywhere, she announced to everyone remaining on the patio, her voice carrying that drunk quality that made it clear she knew exactly what she was saying. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the Johnsons' nervous cough and someone setting down their wine glass a little too forcefully on the table. But Jennifer wasn't done, not even close, turning to Dr. Harrison with this nasty smile and adding, "Nathan just sits at a desk analyzing pottery shards all day, but Blake builds actual paradises with his bare hands. There's something so primal about a man who creates instead of just catalogs, don't you think?" Dr. Harrison, who'd been my mentor for 5 years and knew how much pride I took in my research, looked at me with such sympathy I wanted to disappear into the ground. Blake tried to deflect, bless him, immediately complimenting the lasagna and asking about my grandfather's recipe, trying to steer the conversation anywhere else, but Jennifer snapped at him like he'd personally insulted her. "Of course you're diplomatic, Blake, you're perfect at everything, unlike some people who are just comfortable being average," she said, staring directly at me while she said it, making sure everyone knew exactly who she meant by average. The Johnsons made their excuses within 5 minutes, followed quickly by my colleagues who suddenly remembered early morning obligations, and Jennifer's own coworkers who looked mortified by association. As people filtered out with mumbled thanks and avoided eye contact, Jennifer kept drinking, kept talking about Blake's business acumen, his vision, his potential, each comment another twist of the knife she didn't even seem to realize she was holding. Blake left last, giving me this look that said everything: sympathy, anger on my behalf, and a promise that we'd talk soon about whatever the hell had just happened in my own home. When the door closed behind him, Jennifer was still holding her wine glass, swaying slightly in our kitchen, looking at the empty space where Blake had stood like she'd lost something precious. "That went well," she slurred, apparently oblivious to the social nuclear bomb she'd just detonated, and I realized I was looking at a stranger wearing my fiancé's face, someone who just humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered in our lives without even having the decency to notice. After the last guest departed and we were cleaning up in painful silence, I finally confronted Jennifer about her humiliating behavior, expecting at least some embarrassment or maybe a wine-fueled apology that we could work through in the morning. Instead, she doubled down with vicious clarity, her eyes suddenly sharp despite the alcohol, like the wine had stripped away her filter but not her ability to aim for maximum damage. "I was just being honest about success, Nathan," she said, setting down dishes with unnecessary force. "Maybe if you weren't so sensitive about your career, you'd realize I'm trying to help you see what real ambition looks like." The accusation hung between us like a challenge, and I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized she actually believed what she was saying, that her cruelty was somehow constructive criticism. She launched into this comparison that felt rehearsed, like she'd been cataloging every way Blake exceeded me, his custom F-150 versus my 10-year-old Honda Civic that I'd maintained carefully since graduate school, his newly purchased downtown loft with exposed brick and city views versus our rented duplex with its dated kitchen and single bathroom, his ability to network at country club events versus my preference for quiet research and small gatherings with actual friends. "Blake understands that image matters," she continued, gesturing wildly with a wine glass she'd refilled despite my suggestion that she'd had enough. "He invests in himself, in his future, while you're content to just exist in the same position you've had for 3 years, teaching the same classes to kids who forget you the moment they graduate." Each word was calculated to hurt, and they did, but what struck me most was the contempt in her voice, like she was disgusted by the very qualities she'd once claimed to love about me: my stability, my dedication to education, my lack of materialistic obsession. "You know what your problem is?" she said, moving closer with that mean drunk energy that made her seem like a completely different person. "You think small, Nathan. You think being comfortable is enough, but it's not. It's pathetic actually, watching you be satisfied with so little when someone like Blake shows what's actually possible." I stood there in our kitchen, still holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry the wine glasses our guests had fled from, and asked her quietly why she'd said yes to marrying me if she felt this way. She laughed, this harsh sound that made me flinch, and said, "Because I thought you'd grow into something more, that being with me would motivate you to want better, but you're exactly the same person you were 4 years ago, and that's the problem." The silence that followed felt heavy and final, and then she looked directly at me with those brown eyes I'd once thought were warm but now seemed calculating and cold, and she asked the question that would end everything, pronouncing each word with deliberate cruelty. Why did I even say yes to him when someone like Blake exists in the world? The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs, and I actually stepped back like she'd slapped me because in a way she'd just slapped away 4 years of my life, my proposal, our wedding plans, everything I'd thought we were building together. This wasn't a drunken slip or a moment of poor judgment. This was her truth finally surfacing, the revelation that I'd been a placeholder, a safe bet she'd settled for while waiting for something better to come along. "You want to know something funny?" she continued, seemingly emboldened by my silence. "Blake would never end up with someone like me because he knows his worth, but you were just grateful someone like me even looked at you twice, and we both know it." I set down the dish towel with hands that weren't quite steady, walked to our bedroom, and pulled out my phone to text Blake 2 words that would change everything. "We're done." I called Blake that same night after Jennifer had passed out on the couch, still in her burgundy dress, mascara smeared from angry tears when she'd realized I was serious about ending things. Blake answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting, and his first words were, "Nathan, thank God you called. I need to show you something I've been documenting for weeks because I couldn't figure out how to tell you." He came over despite it being past midnight, bringing his laptop and a folder that made my stomach drop before I even opened it, and we sat at my kitchen table while Jennifer snored in the living room, oblivious to her world collapsing around her. Blake had screenshots of everything, late-night Instagram messages she'd sent at 2 a.m. while I was sleeping beside her, photos she'd sent asking for professional opinions on her outfits that were clearly just excuses to send him pictures, texts suggesting they meet for coffee to discuss landscape ideas for properties she didn't own and would never afford. "This one came last Tuesday," Blake said, showing me a message where Jennifer had written, "I keep thinking about what you said about creating beauty in the world. Nathan studies dead things, but you bring life to everything you touch. There's something poetic about that, don't you think?" The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., when I'd been in bed grading midterm exams, trusting the woman I was going to marry while she was pursuing my best friend through carefully crafted messages designed to seem innocent if discovered. Blake had responded professionally every time, redirecting to business topics or not responding at all, but Jennifer's messages had grown increasingly bold, including one that said, "If I weren't with Nathan, would you even notice me? Because sometimes I think we met at the wrong time in our lives." Within 48 hours, I'd packed everything I owned into boxes while Jennifer was at work, taking only what was mine and leaving behind every gift she'd given me, including the watch she'd bought for my last birthday that I now realized was more about her image of me than actually knowing what I'd like. Blake had immediately offered his guest room, refusing to let me even look for another place, saying, "Brothers don't let brothers go through this alone," and meaning every word of it with the kind of loyalty Jennifer would never understand. I took back my mother's ring while Jennifer was in the shower, leaving a simple note that said, "The engagement is over. Please don't contact me," though I knew she wouldn't respect that boundary because people like Jennifer never did when they lost control of a situation. The desperate texts started within hours of her finding the note, novels of apology, accusation, bargaining, and rage that cycled through every manipulation tactic she knew, from "I was drunk and didn't mean it," to "You're overreacting," to "Blake is lying about those messages," to "No one will ever love you like I do." Her most spectacular meltdown, though, happened 2 weeks later at the Riverside Arts Festival, where Blake's firm had designed the main garden exhibition that had been featured in the newspaper with a front-page story about innovative urban green spaces. Jennifer showed up drunk at 2 in the afternoon, wearing a dress more appropriate for a nightclub than a family festival, mascara already smudged like she'd been crying before she even arrived. Blake and I were manning his company booth, showing portfolio pieces to potential clients, when she stumbled up and grabbed Blake's arm with both hands, pressing herself against him while families with children walked by staring. "Blake, please, just tell him there's something between us," she slurred loudly enough that everyone within 30 feet turned to watch. "Tell him how you feel about me, how we both know this connection is real and Nathan was just in the way." Blake stepped back, gently but firmly removing her hands from his arm, and looked her directly in the eyes with an expression I'd never seen on his face, pure disgust mixed with pity. "Jennifer, the only thing between us is my complete disgust for how you treated my best friend," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet festival grounds. "You had someone who loved you completely, and you threw it away chasing a fantasy that never existed. I never wanted you. I never encouraged you. The only person here living in delusion is you." A newspaper reporter who'd been covering the garden exhibition had her phone out recording, and within hours, the video was everywhere, shared in local Facebook groups, posted on the newspaper's website, spreading through our entire social and professional network like wildfire. The headline read, "Local woman's public rejection goes viral after drunken scene at arts festival," though they'd blurred Jennifer's face, not that it mattered since everyone in town knew exactly who she was. Jennifer's reputation crumbled completely as the video circulated through every corner of our community and professional networks, becoming the kind of cautionary tale people shared with a mixture of shock and second-hand embarrassment. Her pharmaceutical company received multiple complaints from doctors' offices where she'd been a sales rep, with several specifically mentioning they no longer felt comfortable working with someone who displayed such poor judgment and lack of professionalism in public. Within 3 weeks, she was called into HR for a formal review that everyone knew was just protocol before termination, and she was given the choice to resign or be fired. She chose resignation, though the damage to her career was already irreversible. Her social circle evaporated overnight like water in the desert, with former friends suddenly too busy to return her calls, unfriending her on social media, and crossing the street to avoid awkward encounters at the grocery store. Even her own sister, Margaret, who'd been her maid of honor and biggest defender, reportedly told family members she was mortified and needed distance from the situation, especially after the video made it to her workplace in Columbus. The country club wives she desperately tried to impress with her engagement ring and wedding plans now whispered about her at charity events, using her as an example of what happens when someone reaches above their station. Jennifer had to move back to her parents' house 2 counties away, a small ranch home that was a far cry from the lifestyle she'd convinced herself she deserved, trading her BMW lease she could no longer afford for her mother's old Toyota Corolla. Meanwhile, I discovered unexpected peace in my new rental house near campus, a modest 2-bedroom cottage with original hardwood floors and a study perfect for my research, where I could work without constant criticism about my dusty books and boring artifacts. The freedom from Jennifer's constant comparisons and complaints allowed me to rediscover why I'd fallen in love with teaching in the first place. The moment a student's eyes light up when they connect with history, the satisfaction of publishing research that adds to our understanding of ancient civilizations, the quiet pride in doing work that matters even if it doesn't come with a 6-figure salary. Blake's business continued thriving, landing a contract to redesign the university's botanical gardens, but more importantly, our friendship deepened into something I'd never experienced, genuine brotherhood forged through crisis. We had dinner together every Wednesday at this local pub that served amazing burgers and didn't care if we stayed talking until closing, dissecting everything from relationships to career goals to whether the Browns would ever have a winning season. Blake never once said, "I told you so," or made me feel foolish for not seeing Jennifer's true nature sooner. Instead, he just kept showing up, kept being the friend who knew when to talk and when to just hand me another beer and sit in comfortable silence. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Jennifer had started drinking heavily, showing up to local bars alone and trying to relive her glory days, but instead of feeling vindicated, I just felt sad for the person she'd become, or maybe always was underneath the pharmaceutical sales polish. 6 months later, I began dating Sarah, a museum curator who shared my love of preserving history and valued dedication to meaningful work over profit margins that meant nothing in the grand scheme of human experience. Sarah understood why I could spend hours analyzing a single pottery fragment, got genuinely excited when I published papers, and never once compared my Honda Civic to anyone else's vehicle because she cared more about our conversations during drives than what we were driving. Blake started seeing Emma, a veterinarian who appreciated his humility more than his success, someone who saw through the landscape designer status to the guy who still helped his elderly neighbors with their gardens for free and donated his services to the community center. Emma and Sarah became fast friends, bonding over their shared bewilderment at people who measured worth in dollars rather than character, and our Wednesday dinners became double dates that felt like family gatherings with people we'd actually chosen. I learned through the academic grapevine that Jennifer was struggling with depression and had been seen coming out of therapy appointments, and despite everything she'd put me through, I felt genuine compassion rather than vindication because nobody deserves to hit rock bottom that hard. The greatest lesson wasn't about winning or losing some competition I'd never signed up for, but recognizing that Jennifer's devastating question, "Why did I even say yes to him?" had been an unexpected gift that saved me from a lifetime with someone who would always be looking over my shoulder for something better. My new life, though materially smaller by Jennifer's standards, felt infinitely richer in authenticity, surrounded by people who valued substance over surface success and understood that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts. Sarah once told me, while we were cataloging artifacts for a new exhibit, that the best discoveries were often hidden beneath layers of worthless debris, and I realized she was talking about more than just archaeology. She was talking about finding real love after excavating yourself from a relationship that had buried who you really were. Blake remained my closest friend, the brother I'd chosen, and sometimes we'd joke about that disastrous dinner party, though the laughter was gentle now, directed at the situation rather than the person Jennifer had revealed herself to be. I understood finally that sometimes the worst betrayals are actually blessings that redirect you toward the life you were meant to live, with people who see your worth not in what you earn or own, but in who you are at your core. Jennifer's question haunted her now instead of me. She was the one who had to live with choosing fantasy over reality, wealth over worth, image over substance, and ending up with nothing but the echo of her own cruel words. As for me, I had my answer to her question. She'd said yes to me because for one brief moment in her calculating life, she'd recognized something real and valuable, something she ultimately didn't know how to hold onto because you can't grasp truth with hands that are always reaching for more. My mother's sapphire ring sat in a safety deposit box now, waiting for someone who would understand its actual value, not the market price of the stone, but the decades of love it represented, the kind of quiet, steady commitment that builds civilizations one ordinary day at a time.